The late afternoon sun streamed through the grand windows of St. Mary's Children's Hospital, casting elongated silhouettes down the pristine white hallways. The typical ambient sounds of medical machinery and hurried footsteps were momentarily supplanted by an unusual wave of anticipation. News had rippled swiftly through the pediatric ward that someone of considerable renown was slated for a visit that day. Chuck Norris, the legendary martial arts master, action hero, and the man the world knew as Walker, Texas Ranger, was making an unannounced appearance at the facility. This was not a calculated public relations maneuver or a prearranged philanthropic engagement. It stemmed from a far more personal sentiment. His own granddaughter had received treatment there many years prior, and he had never forgotten the compassion extended by the medical professionals. Today, he felt compelled to reciprocate in his own way. The hospital staff bustled with preparations for his arrival, uncertain of what to anticipate from the man who had defeated every villain Hollywood could conjure and whose fists had become the stuff of legend. Would he be comfortable interacting with the children? Might his towering presence be overwhelming for the young patients? Despite their reservations, the palpable excitement among the children who had caught wind of the news was undeniable. As Chuck's black SUV glided to a halt outside the hospital's main entrance, a small assembly of staff members and a few parents had gathered. He emerged, sporting a plain blue shirt and jeans, a stark departure from the combat gear and cowboy hats the world associated with him. His assistant and a small contingent accompanied him. However, Chuck's demeanor was remarkably subdued and approachable. "All right, then," he said in his calm, steady Texas drawl, taking in the hospital lobby with quiet eyes. "Let's go meet these little fighters." Their initial destination was the General Pediatric Unit, where youngsters with a variety of ailments were undergoing care. As Chuck traversed the corridors, his presence immediately caused a stir. Some of the older children recognized him at once, their eyes widening in disbelief. The younger ones simply perceived a broad-shouldered man with a kind smile who seemed to engender considerable enthusiasm among the adults. In the first room, he encountered Sarah, a 12-year-old girl undergoing chemotherapy for leukemia. Though frail, she was alert, and her face brightened considerably upon seeing him. "Are you truly Chuck Norris?" she inquired in a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might cause him to vanish. "That's right, sweetheart," he affirmed, drawing a chair close to her bedside. "How are you feeling today?" Sarah offered a weak smile. "Better now. My dad watches all your movies. He says you never lose." "Your dad is very kind," Chuck chuckled. "But I think you're the real fighter here. What you're going through every day, that takes more courage than anything I've ever done on a movie set." They conversed for several minutes about her treatment, her favorite subjects, and her dream of becoming a veterinarian. Chuck listened with complete attention, asking questions and offering words of encouragement. Upon his departure, he pledged to send her some signed memorabilia and to follow up on her recovery progress. The subsequent rooms followed a similar pattern. Chuck connected with each child on their individual level, whether they were battling cancer, managing genetic conditions, or recovering from severe injuries. He provided autographs, posed for photographs, and most crucially, he listened. His reputation as an indestructible screen warrior seemed to dissolve, replaced by a more authentic portrayal of a compassionate man who understood what it meant to push through pain and never surrender. As they moved through the ward, the hospital staff began to witness a different side of the man they had previously only known through films and internet legends. Dr. Patricia Williams, the head of pediatrics, walked alongside him, expressing admiration for his innate ability to connect with the children. "You're remarkably adept at this," she commented softly as they proceeded to the next room. "I've spent my whole life training to be strong," Chuck responded plainly. "But these children are fighting battles that would break most grown men. The least I can do is show up and let them know they are not alone." The next room was occupied by Tommy, a 7-year-old boy who had been hospitalized for 3 months following a serious automobile collision. He had sustained multiple fractures and was in the process of relearning to walk. Unlike the other children, Tommy appeared unfazed by Chuck's celebrity status. He was more engrossed in a jigsaw puzzle he was assembling, barely glancing up when the famous visitor entered his room. "Hello there," Chuck said gently, approaching the bed. "That looks like a challenging puzzle you're working on." Tommy looked up briefly before returning his attention to the puzzle pieces. "It's a picture of Jesus. he stated matter-of-factly. My grandmother gave it to me. She says, Jesus watches over me. The mention of that name stirred something within Chuck. Unlike many in Hollywood, he had always carried a deep and quiet faith. Yet the trials of life, the losses, the pain, the years of relentless discipline, had at times made that faith feel distant and mechanical, more duty than devotion. Something in the purity of Tommy's voice prompted him to pause. That's very kind of your grandmother, Chuck remarked, carefully sitting on the edge of the bed. Tell me about this fellow, Jesus. Tommy's eyes illuminated for the first time since Chuck's arrival. He's God's son, and he loves everyone, even sick children like me. My grandma says he experienced pain too, so he understands what it's like. Does he now? Chuck inquired, a genuine curiosity surfacing. What else do you know about him? Well, Tommy began, setting aside his puzzle to give Chuck his undivided attention. He helped many people when they were sick or sad, and he never gave up, even when things became incredibly difficult. Grandma says, that's why I shouldn't give up either. A tightness formed in Chuck's chest. Here was this young boy, facing months of grueling rehabilitation, speaking of hope and perseverance with such unfeigned faith. It brought to mind his own private battles, moments of doubt, the losses he had endured, the quiet nights when even the strongest man feels small. That's beautiful, Tommy, Chuck said softly. Your grandmother sounds like a very wise woman. Tommy nodded enthusiastically. She is. She visits me every day and we pray together. She says Jesus is always listening, even when we can't see him. And what do you believe about that? Chuck asked. I believe it's true, Tommy declared with the unwavering conviction only a child can possess. Sometimes at night when my legs ache terribly, I talk to Jesus and I feel better afterward. Not because the pain vanishes, but because I no longer feel so alone. The room fell into a profound silence, broken only by the soft hum of medical equipment. Chuck found himself deeply moved by the child's uncomplicated faith. He had spent decades mastering the discipline of the body, karate, judo, the relentless pursuit of strength. He had always believed that a man earned his way through the world by toughness and perseverance. Yet here was a 7-year-old who had discovered a peace that no amount of training could manufacture. Tommy, Chuck said quietly, may I ask you something? Certainly, Tommy replied, his eyes shining. Do you know who I am? Tommy studied Chuck's face for a moment before shaking his head. Should I? Well, I'm what some people call an action hero. I act in movies and teach martial arts, and most of what I do involves fighting and being tough. Some people think that's all I am, just a tough guy. Tommy contemplated this with apparent seriousness. Do you help people with what you do? Well, some people have told me that watching me never give up has inspired them to keep going when life gets hard, Chuck admitted. Then you're like Jesus, Tommy stated simply. Chuck was momentarily taken aback. How do you figure that? Jesus never gave up either, even when it hurt. If watching you helps people never give up, then you're doing the same thing Jesus did, maybe just in a different way. The profound simplicity of Tommy's reasoning struck Chuck with more force than any opponent ever had. He had never framed his work in those terms. He had always seen toughness as personal, a code, a discipline, something you earned. But Tommy saw something different, that strength, when shared, becomes a form of love. Tommy, Chuck said, his voice trembling slightly, do you know Jesus? Tommy nodded eagerly. Of course, he's my friend. Do you know Jesus? Chuck paused, feeling the immense weight of the question. The room seemed to hold its breath. Dr. Williams, who had been observing from the doorway, moved closer, sensing that something significant was unfolding. I believed I did, Chuck confessed slowly, but perhaps not in the way you mean. I've known about Jesus most of my life. I've gone to church, I've read the scripture, but somewhere along the way, my faith became something I carried out of habit, rather than something I felt in my bones. He looked at Tommy, whose eyes were wide with quiet attention. Speaking with you, witnessing your faith in the face of such pain, you've reminded me what it's actually supposed to feel like. What do you mean? Tommy asked. Every time I pushed through and refused to quit, every time I stood up for someone weaker, every time I tried to show people that good can overcome evil, maybe that was more than just discipline. Maybe that was Jesus working through me, and I just called it something else. Chuck felt the sting of tears he hadn't expected. I've spent so many years thinking that faith was about being perfect, about having all the answers. But you've shown me that it's simply about trusting that you're not alone, even in the dark. Tommy reached out and grasped Chuck's hand. Of course you're not alone. Jesus loves everyone, even tough guys who punch people in the movies. Especially tough guys who punch people in the movies, because they understand what it means to never stop fighting. Do you truly believe that? Chuck asked. I know it, Tommy replied with absolute certainty. Would you like to know how I know? How? Because you came here today. Jesus sent you to visit us sick children. He knew we needed to see that even the strongest, most famous people in the world still have a heart. He knew we needed to understand that real strength isn't just muscles, it's love. Chuck felt the tears flowing freely now. Around the room, he could see that the hospital staff were similarly moved. Dr. Williams was dabbing her eyes, and several nurses had gathered in the doorway, bearing witness to this extraordinary encounter. Tommy, Chuck said, his voice breaking, I believe you may be the wisest person I have ever met. That's absurd, Tommy giggled. I'm just a kid. Sometimes children see things with greater clarity than adults, Chuck replied. You've helped me see something I've been missing for years. What is that? That God doesn't care about how many rounds you've won, or how many times you didn't fall down. He cares about your heart. And if you are trying to help others, if you are striving to make the world a little less frightening and a little more loving, then you are doing his work. Tommy squeezed Chuck's hand. Will you pray with me? Chuck hesitated for only a moment. I know the words, but I'm not sure I've been meaning them lately. That's all right, Tommy reassured him. I'll guide you. You just talk to Jesus like he's your closest friend. Tommy closed his eyes and spoke in a clear, assured voice. Jesus, thank you for sending Mr. Chuck to visit us today. Thank you for reminding him that you love him just as you love us. Please help him keep showing people that it's okay to be strong and gentle at the same time. And please help me get better so I can tell others how much you love them too. He opened his eyes and looked at Chuck expectantly. Now you try. Chuck closed his eyes. Jesus, he began, quietly but with steadiness. I've been a fighter my whole life. I thought I could handle everything on my own. I thought faith was something you proved through action, not something you received through grace. His voice deepened as he continued. But this boy has shown me the difference. If you can use my story to give hope to someone who is struggling, if you can work through my stubbornness and my pride to reach someone in the dark, then I want to be used that way. I want to be your hands in the fight. The room was utterly still, save for the faint sound of quiet sobs. Even the normally bustling hospital corridor outside seemed to have fallen silent. Thank you, Tommy, Chuck said, opening his eyes. You've given me something no training, no title, and no trophy ever could. You've shown me that real courage is not the absence of fear. It's trusting that you're loved, even when you're afraid. Jesus never leaves anyone behind, Tommy said with a smile. He's been waiting for you to realize he was with you all along. As Chuck prepared to leave Tommy's room, the young boy called out to him, Mr. Chuck? Yes, Tommy. Will you remember what we talked about for the rest of your life? Chuck gave his promise. And will you tell other people that Jesus loves them too? Chuck smiled through his tears. I will. Maybe not in the way you'd expect, but I'll find a way. When Chuck departed the hospital that day, he was a changed man. The visit, which had begun as a simple act of gratitude, had become something far more profound. A 7-year-old boy had shown one of the toughest men in the world that the greatest strength of all is the willingness to be loved. News of what transpired in Tommy's room spread swiftly through the hospital and beyond. The staff who witnessed it would forever remember the moment when one of Hollywood's most iconic tough guys rediscovered the depth of his faith through the innocent words of a child. In the ensuing months, Chuck continued to visit the hospital regularly. He became a vocal advocate for pediatric healthcare and began weaving themes of hope, grace, and compassion into his public appearances and interviews. He never abandoned his martial arts legacy or his screen persona, but he began to see them as tools of service rather than symbols of personal achievement. Tommy made a full recovery and returned to his grandmother's care. He never forgot the day he helped a famous action hero find his way back to Jesus, and he continued to share his simple, unshakable faith with everyone he encountered. Years later, when people asked about his meeting with Chuck Norris, he would always say the same thing. I didn't meet an action hero that day. I met a man who needed to know he was loved. The story of their encounter took on a life of its own, retold in churches, schools, and training halls alike, as a testament to the power of innocent belief and the truth that divine love transcends reputation, toughness, and pride. It showed that redemption can come from the most unexpected places, and that the most profound truths are often spoken by children. For Chuck, that day at the hospital marked the beginning of a new chapter. He had always been known for his unbreakable resolve and his on-screen victories, but now he was known for something else entirely. A man who had rediscovered the full meaning of his faith through the simple, searching question of a child. Do you know Jesus? And whose tearful answer had moved everyone who heard it. I thought I did, he had said, but I think today is the first time I really understood what that means. 6 months later, Chuck returned to check on Tommy's progress. The boy had grown considerably stronger, his physical therapy was advancing exceptionally well, and he was nearly ready to be discharged. More remarkably, he had become a sort of spiritual anchor for the other children on the ward. Mr. Chuck! Tommy called out upon seeing his friend coming down the corridor. He was seated in a wheelchair by the window, working on a new puzzle, this one depicting Noah's Ark. Look at you, Chuck said warmly. Sitting up strong, how are you feeling? Much better, Tommy replied. And guess what? I've been telling all the other kids about Jesus, just like you asked. Some of them didn't know much about him before, but now they do. Chuck felt a warmth spread through his chest. That's wonderful, Tommy. You're doing God's work. We both are, Tommy said with a grin. I heard you've been talking about faith in your interviews now. Is that true? Chuck nodded. Not in a preachy way, I hope, but yes. I've been telling people that no matter how beaten down they feel, there is always hope. That love can reach anyone, even the toughest among us. That's exactly what Jesus would want you to say, Tommy remarked with approval. He's probably very proud of you. As they talked, other children began drifting toward them. Word had spread throughout the ward that Chuck had returned, and many of the youngsters were eager to meet the legendary action star who had found renewed faith through their friend Tommy. 8-year-old Maria, battling a rare genetic disorder, wheeled her IV stand over to join the conversation. Tommy told us about your talk with Jesus, she said shyly. He said even the strongest people in the world need help sometimes. That's true, Chuck confirmed gently. I spent a long time thinking strength meant never needing anyone. Tommy showed me that real strength is knowing you don't have to carry everything alone. I was angry at God, interjected Michael, a 10-year-old who had lost his leg in an accident. I thought if God was real and good, he would have stopped it from happening. But Tommy helped me understand that God doesn't always stop the pain. He walks through it with us. Chuck looked around at these remarkable children, each facing their own immense battles, each drawing from a faith that seemed improbable given their circumstances. He realized this was the lesson he had been learning in the gym and on the mat his entire life, without ever naming it properly. True strength is not invulnerability. It is the decision to keep going together because something greater than yourself holds you up. Do you know what strikes me most about all of you? Chuck asked, his voice thick with emotion. You are each enduring things that would shatter most adults. And instead of becoming bitter, you are choosing to believe in love. You are choosing to lift each other up. That is not just faith. That is the bravest thing I have ever seen. It's not our strength, Tommy said matter-of-factly. It's Jesus' strength. He just lets us borrow it when we need it. And share it with others, added Sarah, the 12-year-old with leukemia, listening quietly from her wheelchair, her bald head covered by a bright, cheerful scarf. That's why you came here, Mr. Chuck, so we could see that Jesus works through all kinds of people. Dr. Williams approached the gathering. Mr. Norris, I must say, the change in these children since your first visit has been truly remarkable. They are more hopeful, more supportive of one another. Whatever you brought into this place, it has made a profound difference. It wasn't what I brought, Chuck replied, looking at Tommy. It's what they gave me. They taught me that God is not impressed by how hard you can hit. He's interested in whether your heart is open. When the time came for Chuck to leave, the children insisted on a group prayer. They formed a circle. Those who could stand did so hand in hand. Those in wheelchairs formed an inner ring. Chuck found himself in the center, surrounded by these young warriors who had revealed to him the true nature of faith. "Dear Jesus," Tommy began, his voice clear and steady, "thank you for bringing Mr. Chuck back to visit us. Thank you for showing him that you love him just as you love us. Please help him keep sharing your love with people who need to hear it most." One by one, the other children offered their own prayers for their families, for their healing, for sick children around the world, and for Chuck's continuing journey. When they finished, not a single dry eye remained in the room. "Thank you," Chuck said, his voice barely above a whisper. "All of you have given me something I didn't know I was missing. You've shown me that faith isn't about having the perfect record or the perfect life. It's about knowing, really knowing, that you are loved, and choosing to pass that on." As he walked down the hospital corridor one more time, Chuck reflected on how much had shifted inside him. He was still a martial artist, still an actor, still a man who believed in discipline and hard work. But now he understood that all of it had always been in service of something larger than himself. His resilience had never just been his own. It had been borrowed from the same source Tommy drew from every night when his legs ached. The media noticed the change. Journalists and commentators were puzzled by the softer, more openly faithful version of the man they thought they knew. Some said he had gone soft. Chuck didn't mind. He had learned from a 7-year-old boy that there is no greater toughness than choosing love when the world gives you every reason to close off. Several months later, Chuck launched the Tommy's Faith Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing emotional and spiritual support to children undergoing hospital treatment. The foundation trained volunteers to visit young patients, not to preach or push doctrine, but simply to show up, listen, and remind each child that they were not fighting alone. Tommy, fully recovered and back in his grandmother's care, became the foundation's youngest ambassador. He joined Chuck on hospital visits, sharing his story and carrying forward the simple but life-changing message that had transformed them both. Love can find anyone, anywhere, even in the hardest seasons of life. The impact of that quiet afternoon in a hospital room continues to echo, a reminder that no one is beyond reach, no past too rigid for grace, and no heart too armored for love. Sometimes it takes the uncomplicated faith of a child to show a tough man the strength he never knew he was missing. Perhaps the most remarkable part of this story is not merely that Chuck Norris rediscovered the full depth of his faith. It is that he came to see his entire life's work differently. Every fight he had ever won on screen, every person he had inspired to get back up, every moment of refusing to quit, as something that had always pointed toward a love greater than himself. He had just needed a boy with a puzzle and a grandmother's faith to make it plain. In the end, the question, "Do you know Jesus?" was answered not in words alone, but in a life newly understood. And that understanding rippled outward, touching everyone who heard the story and recognized in it their own quiet longing to be known, to be loved, and to know they are never truly alone.